Welcome back to another episode of Real Results with Coach Joe. I'm your host, Joe Villegas. This is the program where we help you to improve your health, increase your wealth, and live a more fulfilling life. And I'm super excited for my guest today. She is the founder of Bathurst Family Therapy, and she's also a board-certified clinical sexologist, Dr. Stephanie Bathurst. Dr. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah.
We're going to have a great discussion today.
No doubt. It's my pleasure. So, I mean, I know when I first heard a board-certified clinical sexologist, I'm like, what in the world is that? Like, my eyes perked up a little bit. Like, what's going on there? So I'd love to start with kind of like your story, your background, and how you got into this side of family therapy.
Yeah, so I always knew that I wanted to be in clinical counseling. I wanted to help people, and I enjoy working with couples. So I went through schooling. I got my master's in clinical counseling, specializing in relationships and a secondary focus in addiction counseling. Worked with couples for a very long time, and I found that there was a significant need in working with non-traditional relationship structures, in treating sexual trauma recovery, in helping recondition pelvic floor disorders and dysfunctions that were devastating relationships, and really just mind-body connections for individuals. And in the lack of education and awareness that was out there, that kind of led me to better help and support my clients by seeking out an education in that field, which was me finding a PhD in clinical sexology down at IACS in Miami, Florida. So that was kind of the evolution of my background.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I feel like we've talked about relationships on this show a few times with other guests and whatnot, but I'm real excited to kind of delve into it big time today, because there's so much that affects not only us as individuals, right, but that compounding effect of now you're sharing these experiences with the one you love, right? And in today's day and age, I feel like you hear a lot about the term stress or anxiety and what that means. And so I'd love to talk about, from your perspective, how stress really affects couples in obviously multiple ways, and sort of maybe we can take it in the direction of, what can they begin to do to mitigate some of that stress or cope with it together? I would love to talk about that with you.
Yeah, I think that is such a critically important topic. One that is talked about on a very general and big picture scale, but not in a way that is detailed enough for the general public to really understand at a level that helps them buy into why it's so important to manage stress and how it impacts their relationships directly. Right. So relationship and systems are only as healthy and stable as its individual counterparts, right? We create systems that are built upon the foundations that we bring to it as individuals. So when we feel extreme amounts of stress, we bring that dysregulation into our systems, and the systems themselves become dysregulated. Right. When we're talking about sexual health and fulfillment, the way that stress directly impacts sex and sexual expression is through nervous system dysregulation, right? Because they operate on different nervous systems. We're talking about sympathetic and parasympathetic dominance. So sympathetic nervous system is kind of our fight, flight, and freeze response, our stress responses essentially. So when we have hyperactive stress responses, our sympathetic nervous system is turned on. Right, that's what our body naturally does to kind of protect us in those moments. Right. What that does is automatically deactivate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest, digest, and sex nervous system. So when we are in a high stress state of being, when that's our chronic response state, for people who are in adrenal fatigue pretty constantly, that means your libido or your sex response, because it exists on the parasympathetic nervous system, is pretty inactive or more difficult to activate. So that, in a very oversimplified fashion, is the way that sex and stress is directly related to one another.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? And you think stress could be anything, really. Doesn't need to be this catastrophic event that happens to you. It could be just the daily work life grind that you're going through. That could be stressful enough, I imagine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that could offset this balance between those two sides of your nervous system. So are there things like you see with couples where, I mean, they can sort of begin to even identify or become aware of the fact that this stress is existing? They might not be able to put their finger on what it is yet, but they can begin to identify like, hey, this is happening in my life, maybe some signs that they can look for in their own relationship or even their own body.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you find that your general baseline is a more like frenetic or agitated state, if you're finding that you're tired and wired, right? When you're going to bed and you're feeling fatigued, but your mind is racing or your eyes are wide open and you can't fall asleep, that's your body essentially being exhausted but actively flooding with cortisol, right? Your sleep and wake cycles are disrupted because of the amount of stress that you are inundated with. That's a very telling sign that your system is out of regulation, right? Your baseline is not a healthy, regulated baseline, and we're wanting to help minimize stress levels to help it get back to a healthy, calmer state.
Absolutely. And what are some, like, I guess, skills or tools or coping mechanisms that you teach the folks you work with to help them to mitigate some of that stress?
Yeah, so if we are able to identify what life domain in particular or what environmental trigger is causing the stress, let's focus on the variables of control that we do have, and tap into that, because that's fantastic. Sometimes life is life and we don't always have control of the things that cause us stress. So in those cases, what we can do is focus on our bodies, because we do always have control over like our bodies and how we respond to them, right? So these are going to be things like controlled breathing techniques, acupressure points. We can do mindful meditation or meditative movement forms like Tai Chi or Qigong or yoga, because those are all somatic expressions that get energy moving in your body rather than stagnating, but in a non-energizing way, like HIIT exercises, right? Exercising is great for your body, but if you do it in a way that's cortisol inducing, it can amplify your stress levels. So we don't want to do like high intensity interval training, because that can worsen some of the symptoms.
Gotcha.
So yeah, deep breathing techniques, mindfulness, those kinds of techniques can be really helpful.
You know what I tried recently that had a profound effect as a result of doing it was a sensory deprivation, like float tank. I tried one of those. I mean, it was, the first few minutes are a little weird, right? A little claustrophobic, but you lay back. I mean, the water has such a high salt content. You quite literally just float. You can relax your head back and it supports you and everything. Lights are out, totally dark, no sound. I did that for an hour and I came out of there. It's almost like how you feel when you get a massage. Like you just feel really relaxed. Like you kind of just want to curl up and take a nap, But I was just floating there for an hour, and it was incredible to me to think about how much stimulus comes in all the time, and when you kind of turn that off and shut it off, what your true baseline really is, like just how relaxed and calm you can be. So for anybody watching, if you have a place nearby, you have access, something like that, I can't recommend it highly enough, because that was a huge one, and I long to go back to it because it was such a cool experience. But Dr. Stephanie, I want to touch on, so you just mentioned modalities that an individual can use, like if they can identify their stress and then begin to work with that. But in the context of couples, I feel like it could be very challenging, say, if one partner identifies that the other one seems stressed, right? Maybe they want to help them or suggest things. I mean, I guess from your set of expertise, how would you recommend somebody begin to broach the topic with their partner, help them to identify that they maybe are stressed out or in a heightened state, and suggest things they can do to help bring that back down?
Yeah, so I always encourage the couples that I work with to identify the earlier cues or signs of escalation, right? So that we can catch these moments in real time rather than feeding into these cycles of reactivity and dialogue. because there are going to be moments when we're all feeling a little agitated and can get a little snippy with one another. We're human, we're imperfect,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
Even if we're not in a chronic state of stress, we can still have bad days. And knowing each other well, and responding appropriately to those nonverbal cues is really, really important in kind of disrupting those feedback loops early on. So if that's like a change in tone, if that's physical body language, if that's a specific like punctuation at the end of a sentence rather than an uptick, if you know what I mean? Like there are certain cues that you want to find that are unique to your dynamic. And whenever those pop up and present, that's cue for you to either ask your partner, hey, I recognize something feels a little heavy in our conversation right now. Is there anything that you're needing for support? Is anything going on that you'd like to talk about?
Right.
Are you needing some space just to take care of yourself right now? Or if you feel like you're not regulated to have a constructive conversation, the way that you separate yourself without injuring the attachment is by providing 3 things before you remove yourself from the environment. And those 3 things are the intention for why you're leaving, the time and the place in which you're coming back. And you have to come back when you say you're going to. That's what ensures the attachment's going to be protected, right? So I'm going to separate myself and go regulate. I need to calm down a little bit to have a good conversation with you. I'll meet you back on the couch in 15 minutes.
Right.
If in 15 minutes I'm not regulated, I still need to come back in 15 minutes and restart that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that where it's like you're setting expectations up front, and I think it helps people to come from a more authentic place in terms of their communication versus saying, you make me feel a certain way or this makes me feel a certain way, and then just abandoning the situation, walking away. You're saying, hey, this is where I'm at. It may not have anything to do with the other person. This is where I am, and now I need to go get myself realigned, reset, back into a good space, and then I can come back and have a productive conversation like you said. So speaking of productive conversations, I want to continue this for sure. We're going to take a quick break from our sponsors. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Bathurst. Hey, it's Coach Joe here, and I want to thank you for checking out this episode of Real Results. Since becoming a coach over a decade ago and getting to help tons of people make incredible transformations, I've made it my mission to find the most effective tools to help people change their health and ultimately their life. As a thank you for watching this episode, I've created a series of free mini courses, downloads, and resources that you can use to create real change in your life. Simply click the link in the description or head over to www.resultswithjoe.com and click on the free resources tab. All you have to do is sign up using your best email address, and you'll have access to all the resources straight away so you can start to create real change in your life. I look forward to seeing you on the inside, and let's enjoy the rest of this episode. Welcome back to Real Results. I'm here today with Dr. Stephanie Bathurst. We just went through a whole bunch of topics on relationships and how they relate to stress and vice versa. Now, if we were to extrapolate this topic, Dr. Stephanie, we get to a point where folks can really get in a tough spot with their partner, right? They can almost feel like roommates versus like lovers or companions or whatever label that they want to put onto it. So what I would love to jump into with you is, let's say for folks who are in a tough spot, or maybe they feel like, hey, I don't feel that intimacy, that connection with my partner anymore. Maybe there's been some betrayal or infidelity or whatever. How can we, what can you share with us today to help get folks sort of back into balance and, where they started with their relationship, they had those butterflies, they felt good about it and excited. How do we get them back to that homeostasis?
Yeah, so it's a really fantastic question, and unfortunately, it's a really common problem that I have a lot of people come to see me with. So there are so many more. Infidelity is the most prominent reason why people come to the therapeutic space to resolve. Unfortunately, it's usually not the very first source of betrayal in relationships, and I think that's what I'm wanting the public to be a bit more educated on, is that there are usually precursor sources of resentment or betrayals in the relationships that require effective reparative processes. Right. Without those things getting effectively repaired, negative energy kind of breeds and creates this intimacy distance, right, which just amplifies. The longer that we these negative experiences go without being healed and repaired, it's kind of like a wound in the relationship that just festers over time, right? Which is a gross analogy, but that's essentially what happens. So we want to repair it as quickly and efficiently as possible. And there are 13 core sources of betrayal, right? Wow. So things like inequality in the relationship, deprioritization, feeling like your partner forms coalitions against you, all right, like these are concepts that are very familiar to people that may happen one time, and it can cause a pretty significant schism in the relationship, or it can happen kind of like a small t trauma, little tiny fractures over time consistently can have the same effect. So the way that we kind of come back, it requires multiple phases. It requires behavioral change, because our brain won't allow us to forgive something and heal from something that is actively injuring us. The source of pain has to be inactive and past oriented, right? So behavioral change is an absolute must if that's still actively happening. And then diving into emotional attunement and repairing, creating like a full emotion-focused exchange within the coupledom, so that they can emotionally repair and empathize with one another in both roles, the injuring and the injured partner role. There is always a function and a need that underlies every behavior within everything that we do as human beings. So for every injurious behavior in a relationship, there's a function that it was serving. For us to find compassion for it, if it was a deeply injurious behavior, we have to figure out why it was there in the first place. Once I help clients identify the core need, which is never a bad thing. The need is usually like self-protection because I'm feeling scared, or a deep sense of belonging, or like these are core human needs. Once we are able to identify that driving force is what allows us to find compassion and empathy for one another, and that's the source of cohesion for how we keep moving forward together.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. So, question for you. So let's say in a relationship, I would imagine, like you said, it's usually not the first instance, as that's not why they're coming to you, right? They're usually, because it's like a repeated thing. So if they're like, let's say in a couple, if this is the first time, I can imagine it'd be very scary to have that conversation or to bring up the topic. So do you have any like suggestions or recommendations to folks who might be watching this and saying, hey, look, I did make a mistake and I know I need to make it right. What's a best practice, a best way to broach that conversation and bring it up from a place of love and authenticity, to say, hey, like, I'm your partner and I love you. This is what happened. Let's work together to repair this.
Yeah, I think always starting with for any hot topic conversation, and a hot topic conversation is like a potentially triggering conversation, right? A more difficult conversation that we can anticipate. Starting with a shared goal and the intention for why you're expressing this information, having those be the grounding anchors, or you divulge like potentially sensitive information, is going to increase the exchange going well, or having it be better received, right? So the shared goal could be, we want to get to being 85, retired, living in Belize, and just like enjoying our life together. For us to get to that point, we need to get through this difficult conversation and this difficult period in our life together. And we will. That's our goal together, and we're going to do it, right? It's a very team-oriented approach. And then the intention is, I want to heal this. I recognize that this is an active barrier in us being able to enjoy each other in the way that we deserve, and that I want to. And as difficult and uncomfortable as this conversation is, we deserve to get to that place of enjoyment again. So I think as long as you're sharing a good intention and a shared goal that is bonding, that will help mitigate some of the levels of discomfort of that conversation.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. And I love that it frames it from a place of love, like I said, and authenticity, right? Like, I'm here because I love you. Maybe you didn't make a great decision, right? But you're here to work together and overcome that. So we broach the conversation, they come into you, they identify sort of what's going on. I mean, what are some things that you recommend to couples who are now getting into that forgiveness state? Like, how do they rekindle the flame again? How do they get things kind of kicked back up and back to that sort of fiery passion for one another?
Yeah, so once we get past the actual formal reparative process and we've completed the forgiveness methodology, which requires like deepened meaning from the past pain moment. So once we've gotten past that process, the rekindling of the flame really starts with a rebuilding of positive energy moments, right? Because usually at this point, the relationship has normalized the negative moments and denormalized positive moments. And we're already, as human beings, operating at a ratio of 5-to-1. For every 5 positive moments, we remember them and feel equivalently to 1 negative.
Really?
Right? That's a really heavy skew.
Wow.
And that's based in our like survivalist responses.
Right.
So it's not going anywhere. That's at a cellular level. We feel that, right?
Yeah.
So when we have things like resentment that is present, or negative perspective about our relationship partner that has been embedded from historical experiences, that skew gets amplified maybe to like a 10-to-1.
Wow.
So part of what the beginning process of rekindling intimacy looks like is conscientiously and purposefully building in positive quality time moments, like at a 10-to-1 scale to counteract that imbalance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess can you elaborate on that a little bit? So it's like, hey, I pulled out my planner for the day and like every hour on the hour we're going to do something. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, and we try to personalize it to how each partner uniquely receives and processes affection, love, nurturance. So maybe it looks like very specific and detailed fondness or admiration exchanges from your partner, which is more like verbal affirmations. Maybe it looks like acts of service, which is thinking about what would help your partner feel loved or attended to, not necessarily a chore that is your responsibility, because that is not synonymous, but doing something that would remove something from their plate, not doing something on your plate. Or physical affection in a very like sensuous and loving way, which does or doesn't have to be sexual in nature, right? All of these things are expressions of love that build positivity without like the pressure or the intensity or the heaviness. We want to build those up as kind of like a storage or reserve to buffer any potential negative moment or lapse as we are making all of these behavioral changes in the brand new system that we're creating.
Definitely. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you're referencing the 5 love languages. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
For sure. I know. I've heard of them before. Oh yeah. Sorry. Please keep going.
Sorry, Joe.
Oh, you're good. So I've heard of the 5 love languages before, and like know of them, but I didn't know if there was, from your expertise, is there like more languages we should know about, or other things that sort of like elaborate on those 5 topics?
There are a couple of different theories out there, and honestly, I go through a couple of different ones with my clients, and whatever one they resonate with best is the one that I pick, because it's their process and it's their time. So if they resonate with the 5 love languages, because a lot of people have heard it before, they've usually come in having taken the test. There's an expansive one that's, I think, 7 love languages, and sometimes we'll go into that. I have my own flow types that I go into with energy exchange and contribution in the relationships, by partner, personality, and sometimes we'll use that. So I think there's just different versions and different theories of how energy and how attention is contributed from partner to partner to create that kind of equality and expression. And all of them are valid and fair. They're just different ways of thinking.
Right, for sure. And I guess ultimately, like you're saying, is you want to find maybe the 1 or 2 that resonate for each person, because ultimately then we know they can commit to doing them at least on a consistent basis. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And most people have a tendency to give in the same way that feels organic to receive, right? So if my natural way of receiving, if what feels most fulfilling for me is physical touch, it's natural for me to want to give physical touch, because the assumption
Right.
is, well, my partner's going to feel most fulfilled by physical touch, right? But that's not necessarily the case. So that's part of what we want to break down. If I'm giving physical touch and my partner best receives through words of affirmation, maybe there's 50% of my exchanges
Right.
that's being just lost in the system and not recirculated. And
Right.
that's really inefficient. That's really a huge loss. That's energy that I'm giving and is never coming back into the system, which eventually is not sustainable. That's going to feel really deflating.
Right. Right.
So that's part of what we work out, is to find balance and synchronicity between the partner exchanges.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I can imagine how that would just result in another energy imbalance anyway. Like no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, that's not how they receive love. So you're just really like literally running into a wall continuously and you're not getting anywhere, which probably feels, just as bad, if not worse, than where you started in the first place. So it's great to be able to identify how you get it, right? Because you know how it's coming to you, but how you need to be giving it out as well. So Dr. Stephanie, I appreciate you coming on the show today. It was a blast getting to talk to you. How can folks find you if they want to hear more from you or learn more about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We have a website, BathurstFamilyTherapy.com. We can get emails if you have any questions or would like to set up an appointment at help@BathurstFamilyTherapy.com, or you can call us at 215-501-7452.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on the show. It was an absolute pleasure. And for those of you watching, we'll see you on the next episode of Real Results.
Thanks, Joe.